This is TradeFlow News, bringing you relevant news and insights from around the world. TradeFlow News, enabling trade for SMEs and economies worldwide.
These are some of the key topics that we will be looking into in today's program.
First, let's take a look at the overnight headlines which are impacting the commodity markets.
U.S. President Donald Trump on Sunday said the United States and the European Union had reached agreement on a trade deal that includes a 15% tariff on EU goods entering the U.S. and significant EU purchases of U.S. energy and military equipment. The deal also calls for $600 billion in investments in the U.S. by the European Union, he told reporters. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said the agreement would include 15% tariffs across the board, saying it would help rebalance trade between the two large trading partners.
Oil prices rose on Monday after the US reached a trade deal with the European Union and may extend a tariff pause with China, reducing concerns that potentially higher levies would limit economic activity and impact fuel demand. Brent crude futures inched up 22 cents, or 0.32%, to $68.66 a barrel by 0035 GMT, while U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude was at $65.38 a barrel, up 22 cents, or 0.34%. The U.S.-European Union trade deal and a possible extension in U.S.-China tariff pause are supporting global financial markets and oil prices, IG markets analyst Tony Sycamore said.
Moving on to the top news in the energy sector.
New European Union sanctions targeting Russia's oil industry will reshuffle global diesel flows for the second time since 2022, adding pressure to an already red-hot market. Diesel prices have proven surprisingly resilient so far this year. US President Donald Trump's sweeping tariff announcement in April sparked concerns that global economic and trade activity was about to decelerate sharply. But these fears failed to materialize after Trump rode back many of these threats and engaged in trade negotiations. The diesel market is seen as a proxy for global economic activity because the fuel is mostly used in trucks, ships and power generators as well as agricultural and industrial machinery.
India's crude oil imports in June fell 4.7% month-on-month to 20.32 million metric tons, the lowest level since February, government data showed on Monday. India is the world's third biggest oil importer and consumer, making this data a key indicator of the country's oil demand. On a yearly basis, crude oil imports rose more than 8% from 18.81 million tons in June 2024, according to data from the Petroleum Planning and Analysis Cell. Imports of crude oil products climbed by more than 19.61% on a yearly basis to 4.33 million tons in June, while product exports rose more than 7% to 5.33 million tons. Next, we have the top news in metal markets. Gold prices steadied on Monday, with gains curbed by improved risk sentiment after a trade deal between the United States and European Union, while investors looked forward to the U.S. Federal Reserve policy meeting later this week. Spot gold was flat at $3,336.75 per ounce as of 0736 GMT, after touching its lowest level since July 17 earlier in the day. U.S. gold futures were unchanged at $3,336.30 per ounce. The U.S. struck a framework trade agreement with the European Union in Scotland on Sunday, imposing a 15% import tariff on most EU goods, half the threatened rate, and averting a bigger trade war.
Prices of lithium futures in China slid by 8% on Monday to hit limit down after the Guangzhou exchange unveiled on Friday its plan to impose restrictions on position holdings. The most active lithium carbonate futures on the Guangzhou Futures Exchange hit the lowest since July 24 at 73,120 yuan, $10,200.75, a metric ton.
We will now look at the top news in the agricultural sector.
Chicago soybean futures fell on Monday, weighed down by abundant global supplies, sluggish demand and benign crop weather across the U.S. Midwest. Corn was pressured by expectations of a large U.S. harvest, with favorable weather expected in the Midwest crop belt. Wheat was weakened as accelerating harvests across the Northern Hemisphere boosted global supply prospects. Chicago Board of Trade most active soybeans were down 0.6% to $10.14 a bushel at 0935 GMT. Corn fell 0.8% to $3.96 a bushel, wheat dropped 0.9% to $5.33 minus 1/2 a bushel.
That is all for today's news on commodity markets. Stay tuned to TradeFlow News as we continue to provide you with more updates. We also invite you to follow us on Twitter at TradeFlow News, which allows you to watch our program on your mobile device or desktop to receive information from there.